All right, let's dive in. Something really interesting and kind of quiet is happening in America right now. It's a huge shift in how men and women partner up, or, as we're seeing more and more, how they don't. And it's not some loud protest, it's something else entirely.
You might have heard some pretty radical ideas floating around, things like a sex strike or what have you. But the reality of what's happening seems to be much, much quieter than that. This change isn't happening with some big, dramatic bang. It's more like a whimper.
Yeah, this isn't some organized movement with a leader or a manifesto. Think of it more like a quiet quitting, a widespread, almost subconscious stepping back from the whole idea of heterosexual partnership. So, this is the central mystery we're going to try to unravel. What's actually driving this? And why are so many people, men and women, just quietly opting out? Well, to figure it out, you got to start with the numbers. Our investigation really has to start with the hard data, because before we can get into the feelings and the frustrations, we have to understand the numbers game. And let me tell you, the numbers paint a pretty stark picture.
Okay, so check out this number. 38%. As of 2019, according to a Pew Research analysis, 38% of American adults were unpartnered. That means not married, not living with a romantic partner, single. And that 38% isn't just a static number. It shows a pretty dramatic trend. I mean, just go back to 1990. Back then, only 29% of adults were unpartnered. That's a huge jump in a pretty short amount of time. Society is really changing. But here is where it gets really interesting. If you ask those single people, hey, are you actually looking for a relationship? A massive gender gap just opens right up. 61% of single men say, yes, I am. But only 38% of single women say the same. It's like the people who are supposedly in the same dating pool don't even have the same goals.
So, what is going on? Why the mismatch? Well, one really compelling theory is called date economics from journalist John Berger. His research points to a big structural imbalance, especially for college-educated people. Basically, way more women are graduating from college than men, creating what he calls a man deficit. It's a simple numbers problem. And this creates what you could call a partnership paradox, a kind of dark irony. See, for a long time, cultural norms encouraged women to marry up, find someone more educated or successful, and men were encouraged to marry down. But what happens when women start out-achieving men in school and at work? Well, suddenly those old norms flip around and start working against them. A woman's success can actually become a romantic liability, which is just wild when you think about it.
Now, these big structural problems, they're not just theories on a page. They create real feelings. They trickle down into our day-to-day lives, and they can lead to what the source material for this explainer calls a vicious cycle of resentment.
And this resentment, it cuts both ways. Research shows that a lot of young men feel like they're falling behind as their female peers succeed. They feel like they're unfairly getting blasted by culture. But then, at the exact same time, you have women reporting that they feel mistreated, that they feel emotionally and physically at risk, and that they have this deep sense of gender despair. So both sides feel like they're getting a raw deal, which creates this huge gap of misunderstanding. Okay, so the environment is already pretty tense, right? Now, let's throw in a couple of modern-day factors that are basically like pouring gasoline on an already smoldering fire. Dating apps and political polarization. These things didn't start the problem, but boy, are they making it worse.
I mean, just think about how dating apps even work. They're built on anonymity. You're a stranger meeting a stranger, so there's almost zero social accountability. If you act like a jerk, no mutual friends are going to hear about it. This can really embolden the worst behavior, and it encourages everyone to just make snap judgments and move on without a second thought. And then, layered on top of all of that, you have this widening political gap. We're seeing young men trend more conservative and young women trend more liberal. And this isn't just about awkward Thanksgiving dinners down the line. It's stopping relationships before they can even begin. People just see a political view they don't like and swipe left. The conversation is over before it starts. So, what's the result of all this? Well, for most people, dating just feels awful. A 2019 Pew survey found that a whopping 75% of people said finding a date that year had been difficult. It's just become this exhausting, demoralizing experience for the vast majority of people out there.
Okay, so if dating is this hard and resentment is this high, what does that actually mean for the future? Well, we're already seeing some very real, very tangible consequences for how people, especially women, are having to build their lives.
One of the most surprising outcomes is the huge increase in women freezing their eggs.
Now, the story we usually hear is that women are doing this so they can focus on their careers, right? But the research tells a completely different and honestly a much sadder story. Yale anthropologist Marcia Inhorn has studied this for more than a decade, and she is crystal clear about it. For the overwhelming majority of women she talked to, the choice to freeze their eggs had nothing to do with their jobs. It was driven by, and this is her quote, incredible frustration, sadness, anxiety surrounding partnership. They simply cannot find a stable partner to start a family with.
And that leads to this other fascinating idea, the reluctant revolutionary. It's a term for women who decide to become single mothers, not because that was always their dream, but because the more traditional path, finding a partner, then starting a family, just didn't work out for them, no matter how hard they tried. They're creating a social revolution, but kind of by default.
And this, right here, is the core tragedy of this whole thing. According to Daniel Cox from the Survey Center on American Life, the data is really clear. The vast majority of people still want a stable, long-term relationship. The fundamental human desire hasn't changed one bit. Only the outcome has.
And so what you have is this huge widening gap between what people deeply want, connection, love, a partner, and the incredibly difficult reality of actually finding it. That is the real story here.
The author of the source article offers up another way to think about it. Maybe it's not a bang, or even a whimper. Maybe the decline of American romance is just a slow, quiet, almost imperceptible shrug. Just a collective, exhausted resignation. So, all of this leaves us with one last really big question. If that basic human desire to connect is still there, if people still want partnership, but the road to get there seems completely broken, what has to change? What has to give for men and women to find their way back to each other?